This is the Pentacon Electra, a largely plastic camera that sort of fun to use, but keep those expectations in check. Let's jump into the video and take a closer look at this camera. The Pentacon Electra can lay claim to being one of the first cameras to have an electronically controlled shutter via a cadmium sulfide meter. Not the first, but one of the first. This is a nice little camera, largely plastic, and it has a couple things that you might find appealing. However, as I mentioned in the introduction, let's keep those expectations in check. So let's take a quick look around this camera and see what might make it appealing. This has a front-mounted shutter release, so you know how I feel about those. I think they can be effective. However, they do have a tendency for you to pull the camera down on the one side, so easy does it. This has a 3-position switch here, which I'll explain in a bit. This could take two film speeds, ASA 50 or 100, or what is now today known as ISO 50 or 100. Using the old European DIN ratings, it was either 18 or 21. So going around the camera, here is the electric eye. This is the metering eye. Viewfinder, of course. Here's the ornament tower, which Pentacon used as its corporate symbol. And of course, the ornament tower was located in Dresden, which was the site of the Carl Zeiss Jena East Carl Zeiss Jena operation before the end of World War II. And of course, Dresden was firebombed by the Allies. I can't recall if the tower was destroyed. I think it might have been the only thing partially still standing after the war. And of course, and Dresden ended up being in the Soviet-controlled Eastern Zone. And then there was a whole story of Zeiss Icon and Carl Zeiss being split into 2 operations. I believe it was the international courts eventually settled in favor of the West German operation. However, East German Carl Zeiss was still permitted to use that name. So lots of confusion around that, so let's not dwell on that too much. Let's continue around the camera. Here's your focusing ring, and what you have are little pictograms with a distance scale. I think this was primarily for the European market. I don't know that I've seen any with feet distances. There might be, but I just don't recall seeing any. You know what? Let me rephrase that. There are actually feet markings here. However, when you get to here, now you're into some of the pictogram settings. And of course, you have infinity, and then you have, I guess, a house. If a house could fit into the frame, then you have a group of people, a sort of unusual, a bit unusual pictogram for a group of people. And then you finally have a single person for a portrait. One thing you'll notice that there are no aperture settings, or at least there are no aperture numbers. Instead, you have little symbols. Once again, little symbols. And you change the aperture with this little slide here on the bottom, which is located right here. And because it's black on black plastic, it can sometimes be hard to see. You have a small little scale here. You actually have an exposure guide in which it would tell you what these symbols actually mean. So sunny, hazy, so that's the one where I think I called this partly sunny or partly cloudy. Heavy overcast, so that would be very cloudy. And finally, stormy. On top, you actually do have a hot shoe with a flash contact. On the front of the camera, you have this little switch, which I mentioned before. So this is automatic. I'm not entirely sure what the middle one is. This one here is marked as Blitz, which of course would mean electronic flash. So perhaps this means, I don't know, bulb flash? I really do not know. This camera was introduced in 1967, and you can see the styling that is sort of reminiscent of that era. If you were around, perhaps you might remember. This here is like it's a metal band that goes around each end of the camera. It doesn't serve a whole lot of purpose. I have had this camera apart on the back. Here's your back. It's you see it's textured with this. I don't even know what I would call it. You can't really call it a diamond grip, but it is a repeating texture finish, like miniature bricks or something. So you have your eyepiece. Your eyepiece has no, and your viewfinder has no frame line, so keep that in mind. And then you have your film advance. Up top is your frame counter. Now, the film advance doesn't turn to the right. Instead, it goes right to left. So generally you think of a film advance turning this way, but it doesn't. And there's a reason for that. And so let's open the camera and we'll explain that. And here's the reason. This does not use normal 35mm cassettes. This uses the Agfa Rapid cassette, which we've seen used on some other East German cameras, as well as the Ansco Memo, and of course Agfa's line of Carrot cameras, all the way up until the last two models, the Carrot 36 and then the final model, which was just branded Agfa Carrot, which used a traditional 35mm film spool. So with these, real quickly, here's your pressure plate, and of course the role of the pressure plate is to keep your film flat against the film gate here. And so that when you take your photo, it will be as flat as possible and therefore record an image, as sharp an image as possible. And that is dependent, of course, upon the lens being able to record a sharp image. And we'll get into that in just a bit. So this camera was designed to use the SL system, which the internet says is the East German equivalent of the Agfa Rapid cassette. And that's probably why the two are interchangeable. So, how this works, because remember, you're advancing right to left. And so you can see these sprockets turn here. And so your fresh roll goes on this side, on your right side, and your take-up cassette goes on this side. So how it works is back in the day, you would buy these rapid cassettes that were already loaded with film. So that was real simple. And the leader would be exposed. So what you would have to do is take this film leader and you would insert it into your, at least I found this to be the best thing, you would insert it into the film, into the empty cassette. Then close the back and then, fire off 2 blanks and you're ready to go. Now, one thing to remember is with the Agfa Rapid cameras, you never rewound the film. You simply push the film from one cassette into the other, and when you were finished, it would leave part of the leader hanging out, which of course made it easy to process the film. Another important thing is today you can no longer find preloaded cassettes, so you really have to roll your own. And I'm not talking about anything else but film. So you would have to figure out, because this is a standard 35mm film, you could just get a standard camera. You could pull out, or you could wind it, put the lens cap on, set it to the smallest aperture, highest shutter speed, and fire off, let's say, I believe this shoots 12 at a time. So you would do 12 plus 2 blanks, and then maybe give yourself one more extra just in case. So you would have 12, 13, 14, maybe 15 exposures. You could probably get away with 14. Then you would, of course, cut off that leader. You would feed it back into this cassette until you had, maybe an inch or so of the leader hanging out, or even 2 inches. Then, then you could load this camera properly. I've done this before. I haven't done it in a while, so it does take some time if you want to shoot this camera. Not impossible, but it's going to take you more effort. When I bought this camera, the spring that controlled this little nub here for opening and closing the back, the spring was I think it had broken. I can't remember what kind of spring it was, but what I ended up using was a small, very thin paper clip and just bent it to the dimensions that I needed, and it's worked, never had a problem since. So the Pentacon Electra uses the Domiplan, which is a Meyer-Optik design. It's a triplet, meaning 3 lens elements, and it's coated, as you can see. You can see this slightly purplish blue reflection, which indicates that it is coated. It uses a simple leaf shutter. So this camera has a threaded cable release port right here, should you wish to release the shutter with a cable release like that. And if so, you could always put this camera onto a tripod. And here's your tripod socket. It's off center, but you know, because of the weight of the camera, that really shouldn't be a problem. Also, this camera has no ability to use a self timer unless you get one of those manual ones that would thread here into the cable release port. So with that said, let's take a look and see what this camera weighs. By the way, this camera uses 2 AA batteries, so let's weigh it with the batteries. So here's the camera, here's 2 batteries, and we're coming in at 12 ounces. With film, it might tip the scales at 13 ounces, but probably not much beyond that. I actually thought it might weigh maybe only 10 ounces, so this is a bit surprising. Let's see without the batteries what happens. Oh, 10 ounces. How about that? I guess I was closer than I thought. Now, the camera that I purchased also happened to come with this hard case. It's actually quite nice. It's a little bit different how it fits in. This really just wraps around the camera, as you can see. And that just folds over with a snap. So when you want to use the camera, you just unsnap it. This drops down in the front. And now you can use the camera with it in the case. I think I did use it in the case, and it was sort of a nice little thing to have. This back does not remove, because when you unsnap it, the entire camera, or the camera, comes out of the case entirely. It's easy to remember not to unsnap that because your camera would otherwise fall to the ground and probably be damaged. All right. So this camera, as I mentioned, this camera does use 2 AA batteries. This little battery door actually slides across and is sort of held on by pressure. It's not uncommon to find a camera with the door missing. But because of the shape, you probably would be able to get some hard plastic and just make one yourself. All right, you can see the orientation of the battery. So positive on this side and positive on this side. Pretty simple. Then you just put this back on, push it till it snaps. There you go. And you're ready to shoot. There are no indications anywhere that, 1, that your exposure is correct, 2, that you've successfully taken a photo at the correct exposure, or 3, that the batteries need to be replaced. You just need to remember every once in a while to replace those batteries. So to operate the camera, it's pretty simple. Advance the film. Once again, here's your frame counter. And press your shutter release. Your best option would be just to leave this on automatic. And then depending on what film you had, it will adjust the shutter speed. So remember, this is aperture priority automatic. And you can see the aperture close and open using this lever on the bottom. What about this center setting? I wonder what this does. I wonder if this is a B or if this is just, nope, that's probably like 1/30th of a second. Perhaps you use this when the batteries are drained. That way you always have at least, you have at least one manual shutter speed at your disposal. So let's check it out. Yeah, it did seem to open. And that's about it for this camera. It's really fairly simple to operate. There are no surprises. Obviously, there's no rangefinder with this camera, so you're going to be doing a scale focus. The one thing I don't like about this camera is that there's no friction at all to this focusing ring. And because it's very smooth, it's very easy to lose your grip on the focusing ring. There are no what we call knurlings or there's just nothing. There's the painted symbols, but those are really very smooth. So what's my final rating for the Pentacon Electra? Well, I gave this an 8.3. It's not a great camera, but it's not a terrible camera. It was fairly reliable. Because it's from the 1960s and largely made of plastic, you're probably going to find, and because it was an inexpensive camera, you're probably going to find a lot of these cameras are in very poor condition. Generally, the less expensive something is, the less care it gets. Whereas the more expensive an item is, the better care it gets overall. At least that's what I've found. And that's true of cameras, cars, watches, other items. Now, there was a Model 2, the Pentacon Electra 2. According to the internet, it added a small warning light when speeds drop below 1/30th of a second. However, I'm not sure where that warning light would be. Hopefully it would be in the viewfinder, but possibly it was up on top of the camera. Well, where it wouldn't make sense because you couldn't see it if you were looking through the viewfinder. So how is this camera as a camera? Not bad, not bad. But take a look at the photos, and you'll see when you shoot wide open at certain distances, probably those medium distances, which would be 8 to 10 feet, you're going to get some pretty wild out of focus effects. Whereas when you stop down and you're shooting at an object far in the distance, it's fine. I also noticed when shooting wide open, there was some vignetting in the corners, which some people like, so that might be a plus for you. I think this could be a camera that you take out with the intent of having fun rather than taking your quote-unquote serious photographs. So don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. And if you have a question or you'd like to say something about these cameras, just leave a comment below. Or you can send me an email at contact@camera-talk.net. And see you on the next video.